The ceremonial plaza of Zephyria Prime stretched out like a vast ocean of polished stone, its surface reflecting the twin suns that hung low in the alien sky. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy had gathered for the Centennial Peace Summit, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes that would have been impossible to imagine just a century ago. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen stood at attention near the human delegation's assigned section, his dress blue uniform crisp, despite the humid atmosphere of the planet. The fabric felt heavy against his skin, weighted down by the significance of the moment and the dozens of metals that caught the light with each breath. This wasn't his first diplomatic mission, but it was certainly the most important one he'd ever been assigned to guard. The summit marked 100 years since the Treaty of Universal Cooperation had been signed, ending the devastating galactic war that had claimed billions of lives across dozens of worlds. Earth had been a relative newcomer to the galactic stage then, having only achieved faster-than-light travel mere decades before the conflict began. Yet humanity had proven itself in ways that surprised even their most skeptical allies. Chen's eyes swept across the crowd methodically, his training keeping him alert despite the peaceful nature of the gathering. Representatives from the crystalline Vorthan Empire stood in perfect geometric formations, their translucent bodies refracting the sunlight into prismatic rainbows. The insectoid Kree clustered together in their traditional hive mind groupings, their chittering communication creating a constant background hum. Floating platforms carried the gas-based ethereals, their forms shifting like clouds caught in a gentle breeze. But it was the draconian contingent that drew the most attention, and rightfully so. They were the hosts of this momentous occasion, and their presence dominated the far end of the plaza. The draconians stood nearly 3 meters tall, their reptilian features both beautiful and intimidating. Golden scales caught the light like living armor, and their eyes held an intelligence that spoke of millions of years of civilization. At the center of their formation stood the Royal Guard, an elite unit that had protected the draconian throne for over 2 millennia. Each guard was selected not just for their physical prowess, but for their unwavering loyalty and tactical brilliance. They wore ceremonial armor that gleamed like liquid metal, and their weapons, though primarily symbolic for this peaceful gathering, were works of art that could level buildings if necessary. Chen had studied the Royal Guard extensively during his preparation for this mission. They were legendary throughout the galaxy, having never failed in their duty to protect the draconian monarchy. Their training was said to be so rigorous that only 1 in 10,000 candidates survived to join their ranks. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy their massive size, and their discipline was absolute. The crowd began to stir as the opening ceremonies approached. Diplomats adjusted their formal wear, translators checked their universal communication devices, and security forces from every delegation performed final sweeps of their assigned areas. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy, the weight of history pressing down on everyone present. Chen noticed movement in the draconian section and focused his attention there. The Royal Guards were repositioning themselves, their movements synchronized with military precision. Something was different about their formation, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. His instincts, honed by years of combat and security work, began to tingle with unease. The lead Royal Guard, distinguishable by the additional golden markings on his armor, had turned his attention toward the human delegation. Chen felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, those ancient eyes studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. There was no hostility in the look, but there was something else, something that made Chen's hand unconsciously drift toward his sidearm before he caught himself and forced his arm back to his side. A gentle breeze swept across the plaza, carrying with it the scents of alien flowers and the ozone smell that preceded the afternoon rains common to this world. The crowd's conversations began to die down as the ceremony's start time approached, creating an expectant hush that seemed to amplify every small sound. Chen's communication device crackled softly in his ear. "All stations, this is command. Ceremony begins in 10 minutes. Maintain current positions and report any anomalies immediately." He pressed his throat mic and whispered his acknowledgement, never taking his eyes off the Royal Guard who continued to watch him. The other humans in the delegation seemed oblivious to the attention they were receiving from the draconian guards. Ambassador Williams was reviewing her speech notes one final time, Her aide was checking the holographic displays that would accompany her presentation, and the other security personnel were focused on their assigned sectors. Chen found himself alone in his awareness of the building tension. The royal guard's head tilted slightly, a movement so subtle that Chen might have missed it if he hadn't been watching so intently. It was a gesture that seemed almost questioning, as if the alien warrior was trying to understand something about the human marine that stood before him. Chen maintained his position, his military bearing perfect, but inside he felt a growing sense that something significant was about to happen. The twin suns continued their lazy arc across the sky, casting shifting shadows across the plaza's surface. In those shadows, Chen caught glimpses of movement from other security forces, all of them maintaining their vigilant watch over their respective delegations. Yet none of them seemed to notice what was developing between the human marine and the draconian royal guard. As the final minutes ticked away before the ceremony would begin, Chen realized that he had become the focus of not just one, but all of the royal guards. Their attention had shifted toward him with the subtle coordination that spoke of silent communication between team members. He was being evaluated, measured against some unknown standard that would determine what happened next. The crowd fell completely silent as the ceremonial horns began to sound, their deep tones echoing off the surrounding buildings and rolling across the plaza like thunder. The Centennial Peace Summit was about to begin, but Chen knew that for him something else entirely was starting. Something that would test everything he had learned about duty, honor, and the complex relationships between species that had once been enemies, but now called each other allies. The ceremonial horns faded into silence, leaving behind an expectant hush that seemed to press against Chen's eardrums. The lead royal guard took a single step forward, breaking from his formation with deliberate precision. The movement was so unexpected that several alien dignitaries turned to look, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they sensed something unusual happening. Chen's muscles tensed involuntarily, years of combat training flooding his system with adrenaline, but he remained perfectly still, his face a mask of professional calm despite the rapid beating of his heart. The royal guard's step had been neither threatening nor casual. It was something else entirely, something that spoke of ancient protocols and traditions that Chen couldn't begin to understand. The draconian warrior stood nearly a full meter taller than Chen, his golden armor reflecting the plaza's lights like a beacon. His weapon, a ceremonial blade that was both beautiful and deadly, remained sheathed at his side. But his posture spoke of readiness, of a predator that could strike with lethal precision at a moment's notice. Yet there was no aggression in his stance, only a focused intensity that made the air between them seem to crackle with potential energy. Ambassador Williams glanced back at Chen, her eyebrows raised in silent question. She had noticed the attention they were receiving from the draconian delegation, but protocol demanded that she focus on the upcoming ceremony rather than potential security concerns. Chen gave her the slightest nod, a signal that meant he was aware of the situation and had it under control, even though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The other royal guards had shifted their positions as well, creating a subtle semicircle that seemed to frame the interaction between their leader and the human marine. To most observers, it might have looked like a simple repositioning for better ceremony viewing, but Chen recognized it for what it was, a tactical formation that could respond to any outcome of whatever was about to happen. The crowd's attention began to split between the ceremonial platform, where the opening speeches would soon begin, and the unusual dynamic developing between the human and draconian security forces. Whispered conversations started among the various delegations, translators working overtime to convey the subtle nuances of body language and positioning that transcended spoken words. Chen found himself studying the lead royal guard's face, searching for clues about the alien's intentions. The draconian's features were sharp and angular, with eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom accumulated over centuries of life. There was intelligence there, certainly, but also something else that Chen couldn't quite identify. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't friendship either. It was evaluation, pure and simple. The morning breeze picked up slightly, causing the ceremonial banners to flutter and dance above the crowd. The sound was like whispered conversations in languages Chen couldn't understand, adding to the surreal quality of the moment. He could smell the alien flowers that decorated the plaza, their perfume both beautiful and strange, a reminder that he was far from the familiar sense of Earth. Without warning, the royal guard took another step forward, closing the distance between them by half. The movement was so smooth and controlled that it seemed almost like a dance step, fluid and purposeful. Chen's training screamed at him to react, to step back or call for backup. But something deeper held him in place. This wasn't a threat, at least not in any conventional sense. This was something else entirely. The other security personnel in the human delegation had noticed the development now. Chen could see them in his peripheral vision, hands moving closer to their weapons, ready to respond if needed. But they followed his lead, remaining in position while staying alert for any sign that the situation was escalating beyond diplomatic norms. The royal guard's head tilted slightly to one side, a gesture that might have been curiosity or evaluation. His eyes, golden like his armor, seemed to look straight through Chen to something beyond the physical. It was as if the alien warrior was reading his soul, measuring the content of his character in ways that had nothing to do with military rank or physical capability. Chen realized that the entire plaza had grown quiet. Even the background chatter of the various alien species had faded to almost nothing, as thousands of beings focused their attention on the wordless confrontation taking place in their midst. The weight of all those eyes felt tremendous, but Chen forced himself to ignore the pressure and focus entirely on the royal guard standing before him. The draconian's armor caught the light as he shifted his weight slightly, the movement so subtle that most observers would have missed it entirely, but Chen saw it and he understood what it meant. The royal guard was settling into a stance that could be either ceremonial or combative, depending on how the next few moments unfolded. It was a position of perfect balance, ready for any possibility. Chen made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of maintaining his rigid military posture, he allowed his stance to relax slightly, mirroring the royal guard's balanced position. It wasn't a surrender or a sign of weakness. It was acknowledgement, a signal that he understood they were engaged in something that transcended normal military protocol. The effect was immediate and visible. The royal guard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and Chen saw something that might have been approval flash across the alien's features. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same neutral evaluation. But Chen knew he had passed some kind of test, even if he didn't fully understand what it had been. The other royal guards shifted again, their formation becoming even more pronounced. But instead of creating a barrier, they seemed to be forming a circle of witness, as if whatever was happening between their leader and the human marine required proper observation and documentation. Ambassador Williams had abandoned all pretense of reviewing her speech notes and was now watching the interaction with obvious fascination. Her aide was discreetly recording everything with a small device, understanding that they were witnessing something that would likely be studied by diplomats and military historians for years to come. The lead royal guard raised one massive hand, his movement slow and deliberate. Chen's muscles coiled automatically, ready to respond to whatever came next. But instead of reaching for his weapon or making any aggressive gesture, the draconian simply held his hand up with his palm facing Chen, fingers spread wide in what was unmistakably a peaceful gesture. Chen understood immediately. Without hesitation, he raised his own hand, matching the royal guard's position. His human hand looked small and fragile compared to the alien's scaled appendage, but the gesture itself carried the same weight and meaning. They stood there, two warriors from different worlds, their hands raised in a salute that belonged to no specific military tradition but somehow felt absolutely right. The moment stretched between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds, two different species, two different ways of understanding honor and duty. Chen could feel the eyes of thousands upon them, but in that instant, the entire universe seemed to shrink down to just him and the towering draconian royal guard. Their raised hands remained steady, neither wavering nor trembling, held in perfect balance as if they were weighing the very essence of what it meant to be a warrior. The royal guard's golden eyes never left Chen's face, searching for something that went deeper than military training or physical courage. Chen met that gaze without flinching, drawing upon reserves of inner strength that he hadn't known he possessed. This wasn't about proving his worth as a human or as a marine. This was about proving his worth as something more fundamental, something that transcended species boundaries. Around them, the plaza had fallen into a silence so complete that Chen could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Even the alien species that communicated through sound waves or electromagnetic pulses seemed to have paused their conversations, as if recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The very air seemed to vibrate with potential, charged with an energy that made the fine hairs on Chen's arms stand upright. The royal guard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and Chen caught a glimpse of what might have been respect in those ancient eyes. It was gone so quickly that he might have imagined it, but the feeling lingered, warming something deep in his chest that had been cold and tight since this strange encounter began. Slowly, deliberately, the royal guard began to lower his hand. Chen matched the movement exactly, their arms descending at precisely the same rate as if choreographed by some invisible conductor. When their hands finally came to rest at their sides, Chen felt a profound sense of completion, as if some cosmic equation had finally been balanced. The royal guard took a step back, returning to his original position within the draconian formation. But something had changed in his posture, something subtle but unmistakable. Where before there had been evaluation and testing, now there was acknowledgement. Chen had passed whatever trial had been set before him, though he still didn't fully understand what it had been or why it had been necessary. The other royal guards seemed to exhale as one, their tension releasing in a coordinated wave that spoke of their deep connection to their leader and to each other. They repositioned themselves once more, but now their formation seemed less like a tactical arrangement and more like a place of honor, with Chen included rather than excluded from their circle of respect. Ambassador Williams stepped closer to Chen, her diplomatic training warring with her curiosity about what had just transpired. She kept her voice low, barely above a whisper. "Sergeant, what just happened here?" Her question carried the weight of someone who understood that they had witnessed something significant. Even if its meaning remained unclear, Chen shook his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the royal guard who had returned to his stoic watchfulness. "I'm not entirely sure, ma'am, but I think we just participated in some kind of warrior's acknowledgement, something that doesn't translate easily into human concepts." His voice carried a note of wonder that surprised even him. The ceremonial platform at the center of the plaza began to activate, holographic displays flickering to life as the official proceedings prepared to commence. The crowd's attention slowly shifted back to the main event, but Chen noticed that many beings continued to glance in their direction, as if trying to understand what they had witnessed between the human marine and the draconian royal guard. An elderly Vorthan diplomat, his crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns, approached the human delegation with obvious curiosity. His species was known for their deep understanding of warrior cultures across the galaxy, having served as mediators in countless conflicts throughout their long history. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic overtones that made Vorthan speech sound like music. "Young human warrior," the Vorthan said, his attention focused entirely on Chen. "You have just participated in something that I have not seen in over 3 centuries of diplomatic service. The Karathmor, the recognition of equals, is an ancient draconian tradition that is rarely performed and never given lightly." His words carried weight that made several nearby diplomats turn to listen. Chen felt his cheeks flush with surprise and perhaps a touch of embarrassment at the attention. "I was just doing my job, sir, maintaining security for our delegation." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they didn't capture the full truth of what had happened. The Vorthan's form shimmered with what Chen had learned was their equivalent of a smile. "No, young one. What you did was far more significant than simple security work. The Royal Guard tested you, and you responded with exactly the right combination of strength and respect. You honored both your own traditions and theirs without sacrificing either." He paused, his attention shifting to the Royal Guards who continued their vigilant watch. "Such recognition has not been given to an off-world warrior in my lifetime." Ambassador Williams looked between Chen and the Vorthan diplomat, her political instincts immediately recognizing the importance of what was being revealed. "What does this mean for our delegation? For the summit?" Her questions were pragmatic, focused on the diplomatic implications rather than the personal significance for Chen. The Vorthan considered her words carefully before responding. "It means that the Draconian Empire has acknowledged the worth of humanity's warriors. This is not a small thing. The Royal Guard serves not just as protectors of the throne, but as the embodiment of draconian military honor. Their recognition carries weight throughout the galaxy." He gestured toward the alien dignitaries who were still stealing glances at their group. "Word of this will spread quickly among the other delegations." Chen felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had come to this summit as a simple security detail, expecting nothing more challenging than crowd control and routine protection duties. Now he found himself at the center of something that could influence interstellar relations in ways he couldn't begin to calculate. The royal guard who had initiated the recognition caught Chen's eye across the plaza and gave the slightest nod, a gesture so small that only someone watching carefully would have noticed it. But Chen saw it and he understood. They were no longer strangers from different worlds eyeing each other with suspicion. They were warriors who had looked into each other's souls and found something worthy of respect. The opening ceremonies began with a fanfare of sound and light that washed over the plaza like a tide of celebration. But even as Chen turned his attention to his security duties, he remained acutely aware of the royal guards and their newfound regard for him. Whatever happened during the rest of the summit, this moment had changed something fundamental about how humanity would be perceived by one of the galaxy's most influential civilizations. The ceremonies continued throughout the morning, with each delegation presenting their contributions to galactic peace and prosperity over the past century. Chen maintained his professional vigilance, but found his attention repeatedly drawn to the royal guards who had resumed their stoic watch over the draconian delegation. The lead guard, the one who had initiated the Karathmor, stood like a golden statue, his attention seemingly focused on the speakers, yet Chen could feel the alien's awareness of him like a constant presence. As the ethereal representative concluded their presentation, a shimmering display of gaseous forms that created beautiful patterns in the air, a commotion arose from the outer edges of the plaza. Chen's training kicked in immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm as he scanned for the source of the disturbance. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of Kree separatists had somehow infiltrated the security perimeter, their chitinous forms moving with the deadly efficiency of their warrior caste. These weren't the peaceful diplomatic Kree who were part of the official delegation. These were soldiers, their carapaces bearing the distinctive markings of the Swarm Rebellion, a faction that had been fighting against the peace treaties for decades. The lead separatist, a massive creature whose shell gleamed with bioluminescent threat displays, raised what appeared to be a sonic weapon toward the ceremonial platform. Chen realized with horror that the device was aimed directly at the section where the human and draconian delegations were seated together, the perfect target for maximum diplomatic damage. Without hesitation, Chen broke from his position and sprinted toward the threat, his dress uniform hampering his movement, but his determination unwavering. Behind him, he could hear Ambassador Williams shouting orders to her staff, while the other security personnel scrambled to respond to the unexpected attack. But Chen was closest to the danger, and every second counted. The Kree separatist noticed Chen's approach and swiveled the weapon toward him, the device humming with lethal energy. Chen dove to the side as a beam of concentrated sound waves passed through the space where he had been standing, the sonic blast strong enough to crack the stone plaza and send smaller aliens tumbling from the concussive force. As Chen rolled to his feet, he found himself facing 3 of the separatists, their mandibles clicking with aggressive intent. His sidearm was in his hand now, but he hesitated to fire in such a crowded area where stray shots could hit innocent civilians. The separatists had no such concerns, advancing on him with weapons raised and killing intent clear in their multifaceted eyes. The first Kree lunged forward with surprising speed, its clawed appendages seeking to tear through Chen's uniform and the flesh beneath. Chen twisted away from the attack, using the alien's momentum against it, and delivered a precise strike to what he hoped was a vulnerable joint. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its natural armor protecting it from serious damage. The second separatist fired its sonic weapon at point-blank range, the sound wave hitting Chen like a physical blow and sending him stumbling backward. His ears rang with painful intensity, and he felt warm blood trickling down the side of his neck. But his training held, and he forced himself to stay focused despite the disorientation. Just as the third Kree moved to finish him, a golden blur streaked past Chen's vision. The lead royal guard had left his position and crossed the plaza in a matter of seconds, moving with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. His ceremonial blade was now in his hand, the weapon singing through the air as it met the Kree's attack with lethal precision. The separatist's sonic weapon fell to the ground in 2 pieces, cleanly severed by a strike so fast that Chen barely saw it happen. The Kree itself stumbled backward, its weapon arm disabled but not seriously injured. The royal guard had shown remarkable restraint, neutralizing the threat without killing the attacker. Chen struggled to his feet, his balance still affected by the sonic attack, and found himself fighting alongside the draconian warrior. As more separatists emerged from the crowd, the royal guard moved like liquid lightning, his blade deflecting energy beams and striking with surgical precision, always disabling rather than killing. Chen provided support with his sidearm, his shots carefully placed to minimize the risk to civilians while maximizing their tactical effectiveness. The partnership was seamless, as if they had trained together for years rather than meeting for the first time that morning. Chen would identify targets and create openings that the royal guard could exploit, while the draconian's superior reach and strength protected Chen from attacks that would have overwhelmed him. They moved in perfect synchronization. Two warriors from different worlds united in their commitment to protecting the innocent. The other royal guards had formed a protective barrier around the draconian delegation while maintaining their positions, trusting their leader to handle the immediate threat. Human security forces were converging on the scene from multiple directions, but Chen and the royal guard were holding the line until reinforcements could arrive. A massive Kree, larger than any Chen had seen before, burst through the crowd with a weapon that hummed with enough energy to level buildings. This was clearly the leader of the separatist cell, and its target was unmistakably the ceremonial platform where the galaxy's most important leaders were gathered. Chen raised his sidearm, knowing that his standard ammunition would barely scratch the creature's armor, but determined to try anyway. The royal guard stepped forward, placing himself between the massive Kree and the platform. His blade seemed to glow with its own inner light as he raised it in a defensive position. For a moment, the two aliens faced each other across the plaza, predator and protector, representing opposing visions of what the galaxy could become. The Kree leader fired its weapon with a roar that shook the very foundations of the plaza. The energy beam was massive, bright enough to blind nearby spectators and powerful enough to vaporize anything in its path. But the royal guard was ready, his blade moving in an arc that seemed to bend reality itself around its edge. What happened next defied everything Chen thought he knew about physics and warfare. The royal guard's blade actually deflected the energy beam, sending it harmlessly into the sky where it dissipated against the atmosphere. The weapon that should have destroyed dozens of lives and shattered the peace summit had been turned aside by nothing more than skill, courage, and an ancient blade forged in the heart of a star. The Kree leader stared in shock at its ineffective weapon, then at the unharmed royal guard who stood ready for whatever came next. In that moment of hesitation, Chen saw his opportunity and took it. His shot was perfect, striking the creature's weapon and causing it to explode in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The separatist leader fell to its knees, defeated not by superior firepower but by the combined efforts of two warriors who refused to let terror triumph over peace. The aftermath of the attack unfolded in a carefully orchestrated chaos of medical teams, security sweeps, and diplomatic damage control. Chen found himself sitting on the edge of a medical transport, a Vorthan healer working on his injured ear with crystalline instruments that hummed with healing energy. The sonic damage was more severe than he had initially realized, but the healer assured him that his hearing would be fully restored within hours. The royal guard stood nearby, his golden armor now bearing small scorch marks and scratches from the battle, but his posture as perfect as ever. He had refused medical attention despite taking several hits during the fighting, claiming that his duty required him to remain fully functional until the security situation was completely resolved. Chen noticed that the alien warrior's eyes frequently scanned the crowd, still watching for potential threats even though additional separatists had been found and detained. Ambassador Williams approached them both, her diplomatic composure intact despite the obvious stress lines around her eyes. The attack had threatened to derail the entire summit, but her quick thinking and coordination with the other delegations had prevented a complete breakdown of the proceedings. Still, the incident would have consequences that would ripple through galactic politics for years to come. "Sergeant Chen," she said, her voice carrying both gratitude and concern, "the preliminary reports indicate that you and—" She paused, looking at the royal guard with uncertainty about how to address him properly. The royal guard spoke for the first time since Chen had met him. his voice a deep rumble that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within his massive chest. The words were in perfect galactic standard, though his accent carried the musical quality that characterized draconian speech. I am Captain Thexvar Goldscale, first guardian of the royal house, and I am honored to have fought alongside Marine Chen. Chen felt a warmth spread through his chest at the formal introduction and the respect implicit in the royal guard's words. He had suspected that his partner in the fight held significant rank, but learning that he was the leader of the legendary royal guard made their successful partnership even more remarkable. Captain Goldscale, Ambassador Williams continued, recovering her diplomatic rhythm. Your intervention was instrumental in preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. The human delegation, and indeed all the peaceful species represented here, are in your debt. Thexvar's head tilted slightly, a gesture Chen was beginning to recognize as indicating deep thought. There is no debt, Ambassador. Marine Chen acted without hesitation to protect those who could not protect themselves. Such courage transcends species, boundaries, and creates bonds that politicians cannot break. His golden eyes fixed on Chen with unmistakable respect. The medical transport's communication system crackled to life, drawing their attention to an incoming priority message. The voice belonged to General Morrison, Chen's commanding officer, broadcasting from the human fleet in orbit above the planet. His tone carried both relief and pride as he addressed his subordinate. Sergeant Chen, preliminary reports indicate that you distinguished yourself and the human military during the crisis. Your actions not only saved lives but may have prevented the collapse of the entire summit. There was a pause before he continued, his voice carrying a note of surprise. I'm also informed that you somehow managed to earn the respect of the Draconian Royal Guard, which is apparently unprecedented in recent galactic history. Chen keyed his communicator, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. Just doing my job, sir. Captain Goldscale deserves the credit for neutralizing the primary threat. I was fortunate to be able to assist him. Thexvar made a sound that might have been draconian laughter, a low harmonic that seemed to vibrate through the air. Modesty is a warrior's virtue, but false modesty dishonors the truth. You fought with skill and courage that would be admired in any of our hatchlings. The Royal Guard remembers such allies. Around them, the plaza was slowly returning to its ceremonial arrangement as cleanup crews removed the evidence of the attack and security teams finished their sweeps. Many of the alien delegates had remained, their commitment to the peace process stronger than their fear of further violence. The attack had been designed to destroy unity, but instead it seemed to have reinforced the bonds between species who chose cooperation over conflict. A small group of Kree from the official delegation approached them hesitantly, their antennae drooping with what Chen had learned was a sign of shame and regret among their species. The leader, a smaller individual whose shell bore the intricate patterns of a diplomat rather than a warrior, spoke in the clicking, buzzing language of his people before switching to galactic standard. Honored warriors, the Kree diplomat began, his voice carrying deep regret. I must express the profound shame of the loyal Kree people for the actions of these separatists. They do not represent our species or our commitment to the peace treaties. He paused, his multifaceted eyes reflecting genuine anguish. That you chose to disable rather than destroy them shows a wisdom that we must learn to emulate. Chen looked at Thexvar, seeing something that might have been approval in the alien's expression. The Royal Guard had indeed shown remarkable restraint during the battle, choosing to neutralize threats without taking lives when killing would have been easier and arguably more justified. It was a level of discipline that spoke to the true meaning of honorable warfare. Your people are not responsible for the actions of extremists, Chen replied, his diplomatic training finally catching up with the situation. The separatists chose violence, but the official Kree delegation chose peace. That choice matters more than shared genetics. Thexvar nodded slowly, his attention focused on the Kree diplomat with what seemed like genuine interest. The Marine speaks wisdom. Honor is not inherited through bloodlines but earned through choices. The Royal Guard recognizes the distinction between those who build peace and those who would destroy it. The Kree diplomat's posture shifted, his antennae rising as his emotional state improved. Your words bring honor to both your species. Perhaps this terrible day will also be remembered as the day when true understanding was forged between former enemies. As if summoned by those words, Delegates from dozens of species began to converge on their location. Word of the partnership between the human marine and the draconian royal guard had spread throughout the plaza, creating a buzz of interest that transcended political boundaries. What had begun as a security incident was transforming into something far more significant. Chen realized that he was no longer just a marine providing security for a diplomatic mission. He had become a symbol of something larger, a living example of how different species could work together when faced with common threats. The weight of that realization was both humbling and terrifying, but as he looked at Thexvar standing beside him, he knew he wouldn't face whatever came next alone. The summit's afternoon session took on an entirely different character than anyone had planned. Instead of the formal presentations and diplomatic speeches that had been scheduled, the gathering had transformed into something more profound and immediate. The attack had stripped away the careful protocols and political posturing, leaving behind raw discussions about what it truly meant to pursue peace in a galaxy still scarred by old wounds and ancient prejudices. Chen found himself seated in a place of honor beside the draconian delegation, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. The formal seating charts had been abandoned in favor of organic groupings that reflected the new alliances forged in the crucible of shared danger. Thexvar stood behind Chen's chair, his presence both protective and symbolic of the bond that had formed between them. The current speaker was the ethereal Prime Minister, their gaseous form shifting through colors that conveyed emotions and concepts beyond the capability of solid matter species to fully understand. Their words, transmitted through harmonic vibrations, that the universal translators converted into speech, carried a weight that seemed to resonate in the very air. Today we witnessed something that our ancestors would have considered impossible, the ethereal intoned, their form brightening to a warm golden hue that Chen's cultural briefings had taught him indicated deep respect. A human warrior and a draconian guardian, species that were barely aware of each other's existence when the last war ended, fighting as one against those who would destroy what we have built together. The plaza fell silent as the implications of those words settled over the assembled delegates. The ethereal was right in ways that went beyond the immediate events of the day. Humanity had indeed been newcomers to the galactic stage when the great peace treaties were signed, their participation more symbolic than substantial, but today had demonstrated that symbolic participation could evolve into something far more meaningful when tested by fire. A representative from the Stellar Confederation, a coalition of smaller worlds that had often struggled to make their voices heard among the larger powers, stood to address the assembly. Her species, the Luminari, were known for their ability to perceive electromagnetic fields and energy patterns that others could not detect, making them natural arbiters of truth and deception. I have read the energy signatures of the events that transpired here today, she announced, her silvery skin literally glowing with the power of her conviction. What I found was not the collaboration of convenience that might be expected in a crisis, but something far rarer. True harmony of purpose, the kind that cannot be faked or manufactured for political gain. Chen felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment at the attention, but Thexvar's hand briefly touched his shoulder in a gesture of support and shared understanding. The royal guard had been equally thrust into the spotlight, though his centuries of experience seemed to make him more comfortable with the scrutiny than Chen felt. The Vorthan diplomat who had earlier explained the significance of the Karathmor rose from his position among the crystalline delegation. His form caught and refracted the afternoon light into spectacular patterns as he addressed the assembly, with the authority of someone who had witnessed countless historical moments throughout his long life. Honored delegates, what we have witnessed today represents more than successful crisis management or even courageous individual action. We have seen the emergence of a new paradigm for interspecies cooperation. His voice carried harmonic overtones that made every word seem to resonate with profound truth. The human military doctrine of adaptability combined with draconian honor-based warrior traditions created something greater than the sum of its parts. Ambassador Williams stood to respond, her diplomatic training finally finding solid ground in the chaos of unprecedented events. She had spent her career navigating the complex web of galactic politics, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the day when one of her security personnel would become the focal point of interstellar relations. "The actions of Sergeant Chen reflect the values that humanity brings to this alliance," she said, her voice carrying across the plaza with practiced authority. "But they also demonstrate our capacity to learn from and work with the traditions of our allies. We are honored by the recognition shown to us by Captain Goldscale and the Royal Guard." A low rumble that might have been approval came from the Draconian section, where the other Royal Guards had maintained their vigil throughout the afternoon discussions. Their leader, an ancient warrior whose scales had faded to silver with age, stepped forward to speak for the first time since the summit began. "The Royal Guard has protected the Draconian throne for 3,000 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "In all that time we have recognized worthiness in many warriors from many worlds. But today we witnessed something that our oldest traditions speak of but seldom see: the emergence of a warrior who fights not for personal glory or species loyalty, but for the protection of all peaceful life." The implications of those words sent ripples of excitement and speculation through the crowd. The concept of a warrior who transcended species boundaries was mythical in many cultures, a theoretical ideal that philosophers debated but few believed could exist in reality. Chen felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like lead armor. He had never sought this kind of attention or responsibility, had never imagined that following his training and instincts could lead to becoming a symbol of interspecies cooperation, but as he looked around at the faces and forms of beings from across the galaxy, all focused on him with expressions of hope and possibility, he began to understand the significance of what had happened. Thexvar leaned down slightly, his voice a low rumble that only Chen could hear. "The burden of symbol is heavy, Marine Chen, but you do not carry it alone. The Royal Guard stands with you, as do all who choose honor over ease." His words carried a comfort that transcended species differences, the understanding of one warrior supporting another in the face of overwhelming responsibility. The Kree diplomat who had earlier expressed his people's shame approached the speaking platform with obvious nervousness. The attack by the separatists had put his entire species under scrutiny, and Chen could see the strain in his posture as he prepared to address the assembly. "The events of today have forced my people to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves," he began, his clicking speech pattern more pronounced due to stress. "But they have also shown us what we can become when we choose to emulate the best examples rather than following the worst impulses." He turned to look directly at Chen and Thexvar. "These warriors have shown us that honor and courage are not the exclusive property of any single species, but qualities that can emerge wherever beings choose to protect rather than destroy." As the afternoon wore on, delegate after delegate rose to speak about the implications of the day's events. What had begun as a crisis had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a moment when the theoretical ideals of interspecies cooperation had been demonstrated in the most practical and immediate way possible. Chen realized that the summit would be remembered not for the speeches and formal presentations that had been planned, but for the wordless communication between two warriors from different worlds who chose to stand together against those who would tear apart what others had worked so hard to build. The future of galactic relations had been changed in the space of a few desperate minutes, and there was no going back to the way things had been before. As the twin suns of Zephyria Prime began their descent toward the horizon, painting the plaza in shades of gold and amber that seemed to echo the colors of Thexvar's armor, the formal summit drew to a close with ceremonies that bore little resemblance to what had been originally planned. The day had become something far more significant than a centennial celebration of past achievements. It had become the foundation for an entirely new chapter in galactic relations. Chen stood at attention as the final protocols were observed, but his mind was already processing the magnitude of what lay ahead. Representatives from dozens of worlds had approached him throughout the day, not seeking autographs or political advantage, but genuine conversation about how the cooperation he and Thexvar had demonstrated could be replicated and expanded. The questions they asked showed a hunger for practical solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable just hours earlier. The formal signing of the new cooperation accords took place. As the first stars became visible in the darkening sky, the document itself was largely symbolic, but the signatures represented something concrete, a commitment from every major power to explore new models of interspecies military and security collaboration. Chen watched as Ambassador Williams added humanity's endorsement to the agreement, her hand steady despite the historic weight of the moment. Thexvar had been invited to sign as well, representing not just the Draconian Empire, but the warrior traditions that transcended political boundaries. His massive hand carefully guided the signing stylus, the flowing Draconian script looking like artwork among the more utilitarian signatures of the other delegates. When he finished, he turned to Chen with an expression that conveyed both solemnity and hope. "This document will be studied and debated for centuries," the Royal Guard captain said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood historical significance. "But the true measure of its value will be determined by warriors like yourself, who must translate words into action when the moment demands it." As the crowds began to disperse and delegations prepared for their journeys home, Chen found himself overwhelmed by the realization that his life had fundamentally changed. He would return to Earth, but not as the same Marine who had departed for what was supposed to be routine security duty. He had become something unprecedented in human military history, a soldier whose actions had helped reshape humanity's place in the galactic community. The Vorthan diplomat approached them one final time, his crystalline form glowing softly in the gathering darkness. His long life had given him perspective on historical moments that others could only guess at, and his words carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "Young warriors," he said, addressing both Chen and Thexvar, "you have created something today that will outlast both your individual lives and the political structures that seem so permanent to those who live within them. The bond forged in battle between honorable beings becomes the foundation upon which future generations build their understanding of what is possible." Chen felt the truth of those words settling into his bones like the memory of an old wound that had healed stronger than the original flesh. He had come to Zephyria Prime as a soldier following orders, but he would leave as something new, a bridge between worlds that had only begun to understand their potential for cooperation. The journey back to the transport ships was conducted in a silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Thexvar walked beside Chen, their partnership having evolved beyond the need for constant communication. They had learned to read each other's body language and intentions in the crucible of combat, creating a bond that transcended species differences in ways that Chen was still trying to fully comprehend. At the boarding ramp of the human transport, Chen turned to face his unlikely partner one final time. The words he wanted to say seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they had shared, but he felt compelled to try anyway. "Captain Goldscale," he began, then stopped and started again with the informality that their partnership had earned. "Thexvar, what happened today, what we accomplished together, it's going to change everything, isn't it?" The Royal Guard's golden eyes reflected the lights of the spaceport as he considered his response. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom combined with newfound hope for the future. "Change is the only constant in the universe, Marine Chen. But what we proved today is that some changes can be guided by honor and courage rather than fear and hatred." He paused, his massive hand extending toward Chen in the human gesture of farewell that he had somehow learned during their brief but intense partnership. "The galaxy is vast, and there will be other challenges, other moments when beings must choose between division and unity. When those moments come, remember that you have already proven what is possible when warriors of different worlds stand together." Chen grasped the offered hand, feeling the strength and steadiness that had helped save countless lives just hours earlier. "And you remember that humanity stands ready to answer the call when honor demands it. We may be newcomers to this galactic community, but we learn fast, and we don't forget our friends." As Chen's transport lifted off from the surface of Zephyria Prime, he pressed his face to the viewport and watched the planet fall away beneath them. The plaza where everything had changed was just a small speck of light among the city's glow. But Chen knew that its significance would ripple outward through space and time in ways that no one could fully predict. Ambassador Williams found him at the viewport, her diplomatic composure finally cracking to reveal the amazement she had been carefully concealing throughout the day's events. "Sergeant, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? The preliminary reports from our intelligence services indicate that the cooperation you demonstrated with Captain Goldscale has already influenced military planning on a dozen worlds. They're calling it the Chen Goldscale Protocol, and everyone wants to understand how to replicate it." Chen smiled at the absurdity of having a military doctrine named after him, but the humor was tempered by understanding of the responsibility that came with such recognition. I hope they understand that it wasn't about protocol or doctrine, ma'am. It was about two warriors who chose to trust each other when lives were at stake. You can't teach that in a classroom or simulate it in training exercises. The ambassador nodded thoughtfully, her political mind already working through the implications of his words. That may be true, but the fact that it happened at all proves that it's possible. And sometimes proving that something is possible is the first step toward making it commonplace. As Earth grew larger in the viewport during their approach, Chen reflected on the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A routine security assignment had become a defining moment in galactic history, not through careful planning or political maneuvering, but through the simple application of honor, courage, and the willingness to see beyond species differences to the warrior's heart that beats within all who choose to protect rather than destroy. The future would bring new challenges, new opportunities for cooperation and conflict alike. But Chen carried with him the knowledge that somewhere among the stars, a golden-armored warrior stood ready to answer the call when honor demanded it, just as Chen himself would always be ready to stand with those who chose peace over war, unity over division, and hope over fear. The galaxy had become a smaller, more connected place, one handshake at a time.